In the spring of 1483, the crown of England passed into the hands of a boy. His name was Edward. He was only 12 years old. Too young to fight. Too young to rule. Too young to understand that the title of king would be the very thing that would erase him from history. He became Edward V, King of England. But he would never sit on the throne. He would never wear the crown. And his name would vanish into the stone walls of the Tower of London, just as he did. Edward was born into a world where kings were made by blood and broken by ambition. He was the eldest son of Edward IV, a powerful and ruthless king who had seized the crown by force. Edward's mother was Elizabeth Woodville, a woman of beauty and controversy, a commoner and yet a queen. Her marriage had changed the course of royal tradition and created many enemies. From the moment he was born, young Edward was a symbol of peace and a threat to power. His early childhood was spent behind high castle walls, surrounded by tutors, scribes, and knights sworn to protect him. But protection was a fragile thing in the 15th century. Especially when your crown was not yet on your head, and every man around you wanted it. At age 10, Edward began his political education. By 11 he understood diplomacy. By 12 he was king. But it was a crown inherited under a shadow. On April 9, 1483, King Edward IV died unexpectedly. He was only 40 years old. Some said it was a stroke. Others whispered of poison. Whatever the truth, the throne passed instantly to his young son, who was not even in London when his father died. The news reached him at Ludlow Castle, where he had been living under the care of his uncle. And so, a royal procession was planned. The boy king would ride to London. His coronation would take place at Westminster Abbey. And the country would bow to a new monarch. That was the plan. But England had seen many kings come and go. And this time someone else had a different idea. Edward's coach rumbled out of Ludlow at dawn. Spring fog clung to the hedgerows, and dew still glistened on the iron mail of his escort. Inside the carriage, the 12-year-old king clutched a leather prayer book. He rehearsed the words he would speak at Westminster. A just king must love his people as Christ loves his church. He whispered them again and again, barely louder than his own breath. Kingdom in waiting. In London, heralds nailed proclamations to church doors. God save King Edward V, crowned by right of birth and by grace of heaven. But the parchment was still damp when worry began to seep into the ink. England had seen too many child kings. And the council feared the Woodvilles, Edward's mother's powerful family, would now rule in the boy's name. So they appointed a single guardian, a Lord Protector. Edward's uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester, the late king's youngest brother. He was respected for courage on the battlefield. He was whispered about for ambition in the shadows. Richard rode north to escort his nephew to London. He brought only a handful of men. He spoke the language of loyalty. The meeting at Stony Stratford. 3 weeks after the king began his journey, the royal caravan halted at an inn-yard in the market town of Stony Stratford. Richard arrived at dusk. Tavern lanterns flickered against his polished breastplate. He dismounted, embraced the boy with theatrical warmth, and then issued quiet orders no child could hear. That night, Edward's uncle Anthony Woodville, Earl Rivers, was arrested. So was Sir Richard Grey, the boy's half-brother, and Sir Thomas Vaughan, his chamberlain. Their crime? Influence over the king. Their sentence would be decided later, by Richard. Edward asked why his companions were gone. Richard answered, "For your own safety, your grace. Traitors were near you." And the boy, 12, grieving alone, believed him. Lodged in the Tower. On the last day of April, the small procession crossed London Bridge. Crowds gathered to glimpse their young monarch, but street criers ordered silence. Edward's carriage rolled through the gates of the Tower of London, traditionally a royal residence before coronation, but also the most feared prison in England. The portcullis fell behind him with a hollow clang. That sound would echo in every rumor that followed. Richard assured the council, "He shall stay here only until the ceremony." Yet weeks drifted by. The coronation was postponed from May to June, then to a later date. Guards were changed. Keys were reassigned. And the princes, Edward and his 9-year-old brother, also named Richard, were seen less and less, peering from barred windows like ghosts pressed against the glass of history. Inside the white walls, childhood shrank to candlelit corridors, whispered prayers, and the distant clatter of ravens upon stone. Outside, their uncle prepared a different kind of ceremony, one that would place his crown upon his head. Weeks passed inside the tower. The two princes, Edward, aged 12, and his younger brother Richard, just 9, played in the stone courtyard, watched closely by guards who no longer answered to the crown, but to the crown's usurper. They were allowed books and sometimes a tutor. But fewer servants entered the royal apartments. Fewer meals arrived. Fewer smiles were shown. And outside, their uncle, now Richard III, sat on the English throne. The claim was made swiftly. Richard's supporters declared that Edward IV, the boy's father, had once been secretly betrothed before marrying their mother, Elizabeth Woodville. That meant their children were illegitimate. That meant the princes had no rightful claim. That meant the crown was Richard's. Parliament didn't object. Many nobles didn't dare. The boy king, Edward V, was never crowned. He never left the tower. And soon no one saw him at all. For a time, people whispered that the boys still played in the garden. That they laughed behind the iron bars of their windows. But by late summer, even that stopped. The windows grew dark. No tutor visited. No candle flickered past dusk. And the silence became too loud to ignore. Rumors grew like rot. That the princes had been moved. That they had been hidden. That they had been murdered. Some said 2 assassins had been sent under cover of night. Others claimed the boys were strangled in their sleep. Or smothered with feather pillows. Or buried in the tower's stone stairwell, alive. But there were no confessions. No trials. No graves. Just 2 royal children. And a growing shadow. Even their mother, Queen Elizabeth, had no answers. She took sanctuary in Westminster Abbey. But no word came. No message. No bodies. Only questions. And fear. The tower had swallowed kings before. But never children. Never like this. They called him Edward V. But no coins bear his name. No royal seal survived. And no coronation ever took place. He ruled for just 78 days. But ruled nothing. He left no law. No speech. No portrait. Only questions. Only a missing crown. And a missing boy. In 1485, just 2 years after Edward's disappearance, his uncle Richard III was killed in battle by a new challenger, Henry Tudor. The usurper was struck down at Bosworth Field, his crown found under a hawthorn bush. And the Tudor dynasty was born, a new royal line built upon silence and survival. But Edward was never found. More than a century later, in 1674, workmen remodeling the Tower of London unearthed a wooden box beneath a stone staircase. Inside were the bones of 2 small boys, laid side by side. No clothing. No markings. Just silence. The bones were moved to Westminster Abbey, buried near the tombs of kings. But even now, no forensic test has confirmed if they truly belonged to Edward and his brother. No one knows for sure. Because no one confessed. Not the guards. Not the nobles. Not the crown. Some believe Edward escaped, that loyalists smuggled him abroad under a new name. Others believe he lived in secret, as a monk, a mercenary, or a forgotten prisoner. But history rarely spares the innocent. And children who threaten power are often erased, not rescued. The story of Edward V ends not with a final chapter, but with pages torn out, burned, and rewritten. A king who ruled nothing. A boy who vanished into stone. A name that history could not bury, and yet never recovered. We don't know who killed him. We don't even know if he was killed. But we do know this. The 12-year-old king disappeared. And no one ever found him.